Hello, it's Regina. Welcome back to my haunted library. Today I'm going to be doing a review discussion of Stephen King's The Shining. Jack Torrance's new job at the Overlook Hotel is the perfect chance for a fresh start. As the off-season caretaker at the atmospheric old hotel, he'll have plenty of time to spend reconnecting with his family and working on his writing. But as the harsh winter weather sets in, the idyllic location feels ever more remote and more sinister. And the only one to notice the strange and terrible forces gathering around the Overlook is Danny Torrance, a uniquely gifted 5-year-old. This is a reread. What I've been doing since last year, kind of informally, going back and reading Stephen King's work, starting with Carrie. Last year I read Carrie, read The Shining. I read Carrie, read Salem's Lot, and now I'm kind of moving forward. I do have a pretty nice collection of Stephen King hardback books from the early days that I've been collecting in the last couple of years. These are not any original books that I owned back in the day. Those were all destroyed. As in my family, we read them and passed them around, and the dust jacket probably lasted a day. Some of these books are extremely collectible. I have a couple nice ones, but there are some people here on YouTube that have incredible collections worth a lot of money. I'm going to do a separate video about the books that I have, kind of do a little Stephen King tour. But I wanted to talk about The Shining a little bit. This is a book that I've only read once before when it first came out back in 1970. We were all Stephen King fans in my household, my dad, my sisters, and we had passed the books around. I don't think we ever had the hardback version of The Shining. I know we had that silver, it was like this metallic paperback. So it was kind of great to just go back and read this book. I had forgotten about so much, and I really had forgotten how different it was from the film, the Stanley Kubrick film. In a lot of ways, people get into this the book versus film debate. I think that they're really kind of like two separate entities, both great in their own way, but they're very different. I remember when I saw the movie when it came out, really not liking it at all, and thinking it was so different from the book that I didn't like the movie when it first came out. I found it to be really disturbing, but not in a good way. Since then, I've gone on to really appreciate the film and love it as its own kind of separate entity. I was watching a pretty interesting documentary as I was kind of going off on this little Stephen King thing. I watched a documentary about him that's on YouTube. I'll link it below. It was from the 90s, and one of the, not him, but someone who was being interviewed in this film made the point that the book, The Shining, is written from the heart, and the movie, The Shining, is produced from Stanley Kubrick's head or brain. And I think that's probably pretty true. I found a lot about this that I just thought was so moving, especially the character of Jack Torrance. In the film, part of what has always kind of not worked for me in the film is that Jack Nicholson, who is great, of course. He's, as an actor, he's so charismatic, but he seems so unhinged at the beginning that he just gets crazier from there. Where this Jack starts out with all kinds of baggage and some emotional darkness, definitely, but there's a sense that he cares and he wants to be a good person. And I think that is what is so heartbreaking about this book, is that in the more he's just like this bastard. He's not very sympathetic. So the Jack in the book, Jack in the Box, Jack in the book is more sympathetic in a lot of ways than the Jack in the movie. The thing about the movie too is I just never felt that Shelley Duvall and Jack Nicholson were a couple. They just seemed like he seemed to despise her from the beginning, and I think she's wonderful in the film, but something just doesn't really quite mesh there. In the book, you get the sense that this is a real family, that there's a lot at stake. If you've never read a Stephen King book, I think this is a great entry point into his work. It's not like one of his super long books. It is plot driven. It tells a really great story, and it's very haunting. Jack is plays a man who's really on his on his last leg, as far as he's one step away from being a failure. he may have already crossed that line. He's an alcoholic. He's quit drinking. He's kind of like, I guess what you would say, a dry drunk. He's still having all these kind of issues. His wife is not forgiving him for hurting their son accidentally. And when I was watching that documentary, I thought it was interesting is that King said it was his own son, Joe Hill, who did that with his papers that inspired that scene. So little Joe Hill, who went on to be a horror writer in his own right, kind of was the reason why that scene came about, which is interesting. Although Stephen King didn't break his arm, he wrote a book, so that's kind of cool. Anyway, so this is really about a family in crisis. Jack loses his job because he has a problem with his temper, and he gets into this fight with a student, and everything kind of just goes downhill. He has a friend, and one night they're out drinking, and none of this is in the movie, but one night they're out drinking and they hit a bicycle. And I thought this was like really, really well done in the book, this haunting image of this bicycle that they hit, and they really don't ever quite know if there was like a child riding that bicycle. It's kind of implied, but hitting that bicycle scared both of these characters into getting sober. So the family's in crisis, and probably one of the worst things you can possibly do is decide to go live in this deserted hotel in the middle of the winter, in the middle of nowhere. So, but that is exactly what they decide to do. So the setup is really strong, and the book is really excellent. So, and this is kind of a book that it's great to read during the winter. I mean, it is winter, but it's almost greater to read it, to save it for those snow days, because the isolation and the snow, and this is something that was really captured beautifully in the Kubrick film, is like a character in the book. There are a lot of differences. It's not in the movie. It's hedges are it's a maze of hedges in the movie. In the book, there are these topiary animals, which I don't know. I didn't really find it that scary this time around, but I remember when I read it the first time, I found it scary. And the man in the dog suit, which is just a little tiny snippet in the movie, has a greater role in this, and it's really creepy. So I thoroughly enjoyed The Shining by Stephen King. I give it 5 stars. I thought it was amazing, and it's going back on my shelf. And then I'm going to continue with the next Stephen King, which is Night Shift, the short stories. So I already started reading that, and it's really great. I'm reading Jerusalem's Lot, which I've never read. That I guess it's like a short story novella. I read Salem's Lot, so reading Jerusalem's Lot, it's really cool. Kind of getting back into Stephen King. So yeah, so that's The Shining. Highly recommend it. Most people have read it who are King fans or horror fans. If you haven't and you want to get into Stephen King, I would highly recommend it as a place to start. So let me know if you read The Shining, what you thought of it. If you want to maybe comment about how it compares to the film, please feel free to do so in the comments below. So thanks again for stopping by my haunted library, and I'll see you soon. Bye.